What generally was Operation Tailwind? What was the point of this operation?
Well, the Ho Chi Minh Trail came down the spine of the Annamite Mountains, border between Laos, Cambodia, and the North and South Vietnam. And it brought all the men and women who were fighting from North Vietnam, the NVA, and it brought some of the equipment, but 70% of the equipment actually went by what was called the Sihanouk Trail in Cambodia. It came by ocean freighter through international waters, load up in North Vietnam, Eastern European freighters. They come around, hit the port in Cambodia, and there was this thing called the Sihanouk Trail, a network of roads that were built along the Mekong River and then went into South Vietnam. So 70% of the equipment came by sea. In 1970, in the spring, Prince Sihanouk, the leader of Cambodia, was overthrown in a coup. He was out of town, and a general named Lon Nol overthrew them and immediately shut down the port to the communists and said, you can't use it anymore. So the NVA had to find a new way to get this 70% of their equipment down. And they figured if they could push west from the Ho Chi Minh Trail and capture control of the Sekong River, then they could put stuff on the river. It could flow into the Mekong in Cambodia. They joined, and then that's the Sihanouk Trail. So they pushed westward and they overran a bunch of CIA positions on the Bolivans Plateau, the eastern edge of the Bolivans Plateau, were called Paxi sites, PS, and they were numbered PS 26, PS 22, and they overlooked the Sekong River and gave CIA control of that area. Well, the NVA overran them. So this got the attention of people halfway around the world in the White House. Henry Kissinger was headed up a thing called the Washington Special Action Group, and it was defense, state, CIA, the NSA, and chiefs, Joint Chiefs of Staff, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and they came up with a plan for a CIA operation called Gauntlet. Operation Gauntlet was going to have 5,700 Hmong warriors led by CIA people to recapture the eastern edge of the Bolivans Plateau and the Sekong River Valley. With that, they tasked the military, us, to create a diversion. They were 5,700 people. We were putting in 120 Montagnards and 16 Green Berets, 16 Americans. And it was east of a town called Chavan, and it was to block a main thoroughfare and create a diversion so that reinforcements couldn't come down and prevent the CIA mission from succeeding. And that was the genesis of Operation Tailwind. Now, the Air Force has a special operations unit of Jolly Greens. They had some H-3s and CH-53s, which are big transport helicopters, and they would normally carry military inserts deep into Laos like that, but they were all tasked with Operation Gauntlet, moving 5,700 Hmong. So it fell to the Marines because we had these CH-53s, which are big helicopters. And that's how we normally flew in I-Corps in the northern part. This was down in 2-Corps in Kontum areas where we launched out of. So that's how that's how the genesis of Operation Tailwind and how the Marines got involved in it.
So Tailwind is that diversion then. You've got Gauntlet, which is the major operation. Tailwind is this diversion. Um, and okay, and this is a highly secret mission because you're going into Laos when publicly we're not supposed to be doing that. Do you have any idea why you were selected to be part of it? Is it you said the Air Force normally would fly troops in, but they're busy with Gauntlet, so the task goes to the Marines. So is it really that simple? Just the Marines are an I Corps and you're a Marine
Yeah.
in I Corps and that's
We
it.
had we had one CH-53 squadron in country. We had a bunch outside of country. Most two others had already gone back, part of Vietnamization. So there was one CH-53 squadron in country, And then the only Cobra squadron, we escort our transports. The only Cobra squadron was in the Marine Corps, was in country, and that was Scarface. So that's who's going to be tasked for us.
Yeah. And so how does the information come to you that, you're going to be part of a mission that is highly secretive? How does that info come to you?
Uh, well, you're on the a flight schedule is written for every day, and if you're on the early morning launch, the squadron area was maybe a kilometer from where our quarters area was, maybe a little more. Anyhow, if it's a 0 dark 30 wake up, you'd have a duty driver come in. He'd drive up from the squadron, come into your hooch, shine a flashlight in your eyes and say, okay, it's you got an early mission. So this we just got woken at Joe Driscoll was my hooch mate, and guy comes in, shines a flashlight in our eyes and said, okay, get dressed. There's a brief at the squadron. We had no idea what it was for or anything. And we went down and said, what's going on? And they said, well, pack, you're going down to work with the Army in 2 Corps, probably be gone 5 or 6 days. So pack a little bag, take your DOP kit. And that's all we know. We're going down there for a brief. That's all we knew about it. And then we picked up, we were 6 Cobras to begin with and 6 CH-53s. We picked them up and escorted them down to Khartoum. And that's when we got the brief and learned what the mission was all about.
And so, for did Tailwind end up being, it was about a 4-day operation, is that right?
Uh, it did once it finally launched, right? It was
And
supposed to go on the 3rd or the 4th of September, but this was monsoon season, and it's always iffy as to the weather. So we finally went down and try it. We were going to launch on the 8th, but we ran into we had to abort on the 8th. We got as far as we were briefing at Khartoum and FOB 2, which was Special Forces Camp, and then we were going to fly to Dak To, a staging area, wait there until we got word that the weather was good enough to make it into the mountains, and then going into Laos.
and so through the 4 days of Tailwind, then is this, I mean, basically, are you just going back and forth then from Khartoum is kind of your base of operations for this?
Well, Khartoum was down in 2 Corps,
Right.
but we flew down for the brief on the 7th, and we were going to launch the next morning. So we spent the night at the Special Forces camp, and they were great. They gave us their racks. I guess they slept on the ground, gave us their racks to sleep in, and it was a great thing. The next morning, the 8th, we loaded up, loaded all the troops, went out to Dak To,
That's
this little
all.
staging area, about 40 clicks to the northwest. And we're at Dak To waiting for the weather to break so they could they were going to put in a 7-person Pathfinder team ahead of us, and they checked the zone, but we waited for hours and hours for the weather to break. But we overstayed our welcome, and the local bad guys organized a welcoming party. They started launching mortars at us, blew up an Army Cobra, damaged some of our Cobras, and so we had to call off the thing for the day. Went back to Khartoum, patched up the aircraft, and then we went home to Marble Mountain, waiting for word to come. Okay, the next day, the next day. So we were just on call, and the high-level Marine and generals were not very happy with this because, as I said, there's only one Cobra squadron in the Marine Corps, and here the Army wanted 6 of our Cobras, and we're standing by. And if they said, okay, it's a go, we would launch from there. It was maybe a 2-hour flight to Khartoum, and then we'd launch and do this mission. But we were standing by, and they needed us in I Corps. So high level message traffic went back and forth between 3 and 4 stars. And after that, after the first attempt on the 8th, they reduced it to 5 CH-53s and 4 Cobras. So then on the 10th, we waited. On the 8th, we waited the 9th and the 10th. On the 10th, the word came, okay, launch, it's a go. So we flew to Kontum. We briefed again, reloaded, went to Dak To, didn't overstay our welcome, and then launched for Laos. SOG was restricted to within 20 kilometers of the border because of we had been thrown out. Cambodia, when Sihanouk in '65 caved to the communist pressures and severed diplomatic relations with the U.S. So in Laos, the ambassador was really worried because the premier of Laos is walking a tightrope. He had people who wanted to go with the communists and people who wanted to go with South Vietnam. They claimed neutrality and recognized both countries, even though there were 60 to 90,000 NVA in their country on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. They maintain neutrality. So anyhow, the ambassador kept SOG limited to within 20 clicks of the border. For this thing, they had to waive that, and Henry Kissinger's WSAG did that. They said we can go beyond 20 clicks. So from Dak To, the staging area, we went 100 clicks, but we were probably 40 clicks west of the border or something like that over near Sivan.
And so in the 4 days then of this operation, are you then basically just going back and forth from Dak To into Laos, Dak To into Laos? Is it
Oh,
kind of continuous missions in and out?
no, we put them in on the 11th, and it turned out Pathfinders went in, said, "Come on down. It's quiet as a church." The zone wasn't big enough we had the troops on 453s with the fifth CH-53 as the backup and search and rescue bird. But the zone was not large enough, so we had to put them in one at a time. The first one came in, and the hillsides erupted with tracers, and as if they were waiting for us. I don't know that they had prior knowledge, but everybody was getting shot up. We got all 4 aircraft in and out, in and out, in and out. And as soon as we left, Captain Gene McCarley, the head of the SOG force, said all of a sudden they stopped shooting and it was quiet as a church again. you know?
Mm.
So what we would do, we were on call, and if they needed medevac or resupply or the extraction, they would call us. But we put them in on the 11th. On the 12th, they had some KIAs that they had to leave behind because it was slowing them. Gene McCarley's game plan was a game of cat and mouse to keep moving, and the NVA's bringing in reinforcements and trying to trap them and keep them down. But the medic on the mission, the SOG medic, a guy named Mike Rose, after day 1, he had 2 litter patients, so it's really slowing him down. And then he had a dozen, then 2 dozen patients he's looking after. So the wounded were really slowing him down. So the Army tried to get a Huey in for a medevac on the 12th, on the second day. We were still back at Marble Mountain just standing by, but the Army tried to get in, and they ended up getting a Cobra shot down, and the Huey couldn't make it in. So then on the 13th, they called us and said, come back, and we're going to bring in the CH-53 and get all the seriously wounded out, the 2 litter patients and everybody out. And we weren't successful. The 53 came in. It was flown by a guy named Bill Beardall. He came over the LZ, taking a lot of fire, and they had blown some trees. So down in the jungle, he could land, and he started coming down like this. He couldn't really land. He's about 5 feet off the ground. And Mike Rose was handing up the first litter patient when they took rounds and were losing a hydraulic system, and then the rotor blades hit a tree and they start shaking. So he climbs out, and they're pissing their hydraulic fluid overboard. He made it about 2 kilometers, and they got to the ground just as the last of the hydraulic fluid was pissed overboard. And so that medevac resupply mission turned into another aircrew rescue. And we had to go in and pick up these guys on a ladder because there wasn't room. We had a 53 with the big, it's a ladder, you roll out the back off the ramp, 6 foot aluminum rungs with 3 steel cables coming down. So they hovered next to them. All the guys get out, get on the ladder.
Yeah, this picture here, I'm looking at this helo, and it looks like we've got maybe 10 or 11 guys hanging from this ladder.
Well, there's a 53 crew, and then there were two SF medics on board. And there was also a colonel from Saigon whose call sign was Crossbow, and he was kind of the head of SOG. And he says he was going to go out there, so he's on. And then they ended up getting shot down, so we picked them up. So we had I think there was 9 of them. I think there was a 6-man crew for the 53, and then the 3 special forces guy. And uh, as an aside, the pilot of the 53 was Bill Beardall, and he was the last guy to get on the ladder. And he sees as they're taking off, he sees the ladder flopping in the breeze, and he thinks it's going to come up and maybe hit the tail rotor. So he said, I'll just climb down a few rungs to anchor it. So he
Oh,
starts letting himself down, and it wasn't working because Bill was about 5'5" and weighed 140 pounds. And it wasn't working. So he
geez.
gave up on that idea. But he's the last guy. You see him kind of separate from the others in the photo.
Do you have any idea how long they were airborne like that, hanging onto this ladder?
Oh, not very long at all. They went maybe 5 kilometers and they got shot up pretty badly and were losing hydraulics. So the crew chief said, get it on the ground. So they had to, hover and then lay the ladder out. You'd come to a hover and then taxi forward as you went lower so that the ladder lays out on the ground and guys could unhook from the ladder and get off. Then another 53 was able to land next to them, get all of those guys that were on the ladder. By then, the crew chief of that aircraft with the ladder uh, the crew chief said, I think we can make it. They lost one of their hydraulic system and had another with what the second one wasn't leaking. He said, I think they can make it. So they actually lifted off and did make it back to Dock Tow. Otherwise, we would have lost 2 of them on that one day.
So one of the things you write is that the impossible happened and we played part in making it happen. And I think you've told us a little bit about what you mean by that, that the impossible happened and we played a role in making it happen. But, spell that out a bit more. I mean, what was it about this mission that at a moment or two seemed like this might not be possible to pull off?
Well, it was supposed to be a diversion. And the demo guys were told bring a lot of extra C4 and explosives because you might have to blow up some bridges to try to keep reinforcements coming from this on this highway east of Chavan. But but reinforcements were coming, and they were bringing in truckloads of NVA to try to catch the SAW guys, the 16 Americans, 120 yards. And a lot of these trucks were towing 37 millimeter anti-aircraft guns. So it was becoming dicey whether or not we could get them out and whether or not they could evade because they had 2-liter patients. And Mike Rose ended up treating something like 50 or more wounded people. He was busy. I mean, he's trying to put it, some of their IVs were glass bottles, others were pouches, which were relatively new. Put a glass bottle and it'd get shot out. And Mike Rose would go out and if they were ambulatory, they'd come to him. He was in the middle at second platoon, first platoon had points, second platoon, the casualties, and third platoon, the rear. And
Yeah.
Mike, if they weren't ambulatory, Mike would have to go out and get them. And he'd get a call someone's wounded, and he'd go out in the middle of a hail of bullets and lay on the ground, shielding someone that's wounded, treating them, and then drag them back. And it just did an incredible job. But he was so bogged down with unit, they couldn't maneuver. They didn't have the speed, and the weather was bad. So air support was on and off. It was spotty. So it was started to look dicey as to whether or not, and they were running out of ammunition. So it was getting to be dicey as to whether or not they'd make it out.
Wow. Do you know how many trips you made into Laos over that 4-day period?
Oh yeah, we just put them in the insert. Then we attempted on the 13th, three trips. On the 13th, we attempted the medevac and got the 53, and the 53 was shot down. Then we were going back on the 14th to try another medevac and resupply, but it evolved when the forward air controller showed up on station in the morning after the weather lifted. He looked and saw that they weren't going to get out. They were surrounded. There were NBA all around them, and he said, "You got to get out now, or you're not getting out." So we initially were going to go for a resupply and medevac attempt, and it became an extract. And then they for that they said we're probably going to have to use tear gas, and gave everybody gas masks, and they brought in two A1s, they call them SPADs, as gas birds to drop the gas. And Gene McCarley found an LZ full of elephant grass, and they they pushed over the elephant grass to make a spot big enough for a single 53. And interesting side story, there was a staff sergeant named Bernie Bright,
Yeah.
and he was in the middle of the elephant grass. He had a signal panel, one of these international orange signal panels inside his shirt. He'd pull it out of his shirt, stand up in the LZ, and hold that thing for the guide to 53 in while there's bullets going everywhere. That 53 would land, he'd turn around, put it back in his shirt, drop to one knee, start shooting at the bad guys. We got all the wounded on the first 53, the litter patients, all the wounded, and as many as could fit on. Then a second 53 came in, and Bernie Bright did the same thing, held up this orange panel and came in. Then the third 53 comes in. He does the same thing again. We had used 453s to put him in, and he's expecting 453s to take him out. Well, he's on one knee shooting at the enemy, and he sees Gene McCarley and Mike Rose going running for the back of the helicopter, and then he realizes this is the last bus out of town. so so he goes running for the back ramp, gets on the ramp. Just as he gets there, five NBA come out of the elephant grass, and he and Gene McCarley mowed them down. And Gene McCarley told me, I just don't know why one of those guys didn't throw a grenade right into the back of the helicopter. They were that close, could have just thrown one in, and that would have been the end of that. But
Wow.
as you take more people out, the perimeter shrinks, and the bad guys are coming in, the perimeter shrinks, and the NBA's closing. And while they're in the zone, the last bird was flown by a guy named Don Persky. And he's saying, "Are they on yet? Are they on yet? Are they on yet?" And the crew chief was a guy named Snipes, and he says, "Almost on." And then he finally says, "They're all on. Let's go." Well, they had one of their engines shot out sitting in the zone. So now they have one engine, and Persky's milking it, getting out in a hail of bullets. And finally gets up about 4,000 feet. And he says, "Okay, to everybody take off your gas masks." And Snipes taking off his gas mask, goes to get a cigarette and light it up, and all the SF guys start screaming at him and point to the ceiling. There's just fuel raining down. So before Snipes could get up to the cockpit to tell Persky that they got a bad fuel leak, the second engine quits. And they're coming down an auto rotation in a helicopter. If the engine stops, excuse me, you would lower the collective, which adjusts the pitch on the blades. You lower it all the way so you take the pitch out of the blades, so it's flat pitch. And then you're falling through the air, and it's like when you were a kid and you blew on a pinwheel. The air coming up through the blades keeps them turning, so you have that energy. Then when you get down close to the ground, you would flare and then pull pitch and use that energy to stop your rate of descent and just set it down. In theory, that's how it works. So Persky's calls a mayday that lost his second engine, and there's a pregnant pause while he's waiting for someone to say, "Well, looks like an LZ to your right or an LZ to your left," and nobody says anything, and it's just triple canopy jungle. So if you shoot an auto and stop in top of a triple canopy jungle, you might be 100 feet in the air and you're just going to fall through the trees, and that's a bad day. So he saw there was a little ridge line, and he thought if he bled off a few of his RPM, his turns, he could make it over that ridge line and hope for a better day on the other side. And he did that. And when he got over the ridge line, there was this big like canyon with the river in the bottom, and he dove down in it, but he didn't have 100% rotor RPM. And when he got to the bottom, there was like a fork in the stream with a little sandy area, and he thought he could land there. He flared, came down, pulled pitch, and didn't quite have enough energy in the blades, and they hit really hard, rolled over, the fuselage broke in half, and everybody's turned upside down. And only one person, 1 yard was killed in that. Kind of miraculous that only one person was killed in that. And then we brought in a Starbird, and they kind of hovered over the river and lowered the ramp. And Mike Rose went back in, and he's pulling people out, and they're throwing people into the other 53. And we finally got everybody out of there, but we lost another 53 that day. Everybody, we made it back. Lost 3 KIAs in the whole mission, and it looked like it was going to be on day 4. It looked iffy as to whether or not they could get out. Gene McCarley had it in his mind that they would find a defendable position, and with the remaining ammunition, just have a last stand like the Alamo. Some of the other Americans thought that maybe they should break up into small teams and try to slip through the enemy lines and make their way to South Vietnam or Thailand or somewhere. But
Hmm.
it was looking like, yeah, we might not get them out. But it all's well that ends well.
They did. And you said that CS gas was dropped on the NVA just to slow them a bit.
Yeah. They the day after, on the 13th, after we lost the 53, they decided they were going to use gas, and the Air Force came in on an OB-10, which was a forward air controller aircraft, and they uh, thought they could do a little resupply. In the back of an OB-10, there's a little cargo compartment. You could fit like 5 or 6 troops in there to parachute out. Well, they put one SF guy in there, and they loaded up some duffel bags, one with claymore mines, one with ammunition, and one full of gas masks. And they found an old cargo parachute, and the plan was they were going to come over, get over the SOG team, and then pull up, and they tell the guy kick it out, and they give them their gas masks and some ammunition so they could fight on. Well, the old cargo chute was dry rotted. Pilot chute comes out to extract the main one, and it just disintegrated in a puff of nylon dust. And
Hmm.
the whole package went over onto the hillside where the NVA were. So the FAC spent the rest of the afternoon running airstrikes on that mountain, on that hillside, trying to keep it from falling into NVA hands. But we used CS gas, which is an industrialized tear gas. We were accused of using something else years later, but it wasn't. I mean, the gas mask I was given was a plain old standard issue gas mask. It wasn't an aviation gas mask where you could plug in to your intercom system and talk on the radio. So put it on, put my helmet on over my head, and the buckles were digging into my head, and we had a boom mic, so I was flying with a guy named Bob Grove, and we tried holding the mic against our throat to see if we could hear each other, and it didn't work, so we just took the masks off. Some of the 53 drivers said it restricts your vision too much. They took the masks off. Most of the SOG guys did not have masks. They were wet, the filters were wet, or they were shot up, or they just didn't. They lost them, didn't have them.
Yeah.
So so years later, some people came out and said we were using nerve gas, but here it's not that discriminating. You can't have all the NVA laying dead and the Americans walking around them and not being affected. So that It was a shame that came out. But anyhow, we did use CS gas,
Yeah.
and that helped get them out.
Now, when you're going into Laos as part of Operation Tailwind, are you, as a Cobra pilot, are you engaging NVA forces yourself?
Only in defense of the SOG team on the ground. Uh, what we had, fortunately, the weather was really bad the morning of the 14th on the last day, but then it broke, and we ended up with fast movers stacked all the way to heaven. So outside where they had the in-aircraft, the 37 millimeter set up, they were running, think of three concentric rings around SOG. Outside the farthest ring, they were bringing in fast movers, dropping napalm and 500-pound bombs for the anti-aircraft sites. In the middle, the A1s, the SPADs, which are prop planes, slower moving, they were dropping CBUs and running 20 millimeter on the NBA. And then we were right around the CH-53s, a wagon wheel circle around them, shooting out at the perimeter, just outside the perimeter of the SOG perimeter. So
So,
it was three concentric rings.
so the security, so yeah, I mean, so you're closest, you're in that inner circle. You're over that inner
Yeah,
circle where
we're
the SAW
yeah,
guys and the yards are. Yeah.
yeah.
Now, after this is all done, you say in what you write that, you know, you don't, I don't think you exactly say this, but kind of the idea I got was that, well, okay, so that was a set of missions, and now I go back to Marble Mountain, and a new set of missions comes up, and it wasn't something that you really spent a whole lot of time thinking about at the time, this particular mission, Operation Tailwind. Is that right?
Yeah, the cross-border stuff was all top secret. So at the end, it was turn in your maps. This is a top secret mission. You're not to speak to anyone about it. So unless it was someone you who flew the mission with you, you never talked about it again to friends, family, or anybody else. So you just never mentioned it again.